SimCity was an instant classic, thrusting both publisher Maxis and developer Will Wright into the PC gaming spotlight. Naturally, a follow-up was in order, and the result was SimEarth, released in 1990 for the Macintosh, followed by versions for all sorts of computers and consoles. This is the DOS PC release distributed by Broderbund, although there was a later one released for DOS and Windows 3.1 under the Maxis Classics line in 1991. So, SimEarth. Not quite the SimCity sequel that some had expected, although it does fit into the same vein of cerebral system simulator that you'd expect from Will Wright. As mentioned on the back of the box, it's inspired by the Gaia hypothesis by independent scientist James Lovelock. Reading the 220-page spiral-bound manual explains what this means in the words of Mr. Lovelock himself. Gaia theory says that the environment of Earth and the organisms within it are tightly connected, forming a self-regulating system that affects the climate and atmosphere. Basically, the planet functions as one organism, and in SimEarth, you'll put this theory to the test, which the rest of the manual lays out for you as to how to do that. Inside the box, you also get a 20-page addendum, a registration card with phrasing Charles Wright would approve of, some lovely floppy disks containing the game itself, and a Maxis product catalog, which at this point consisted of SimCity, SimEarth, and a few related items, and that's it. And yeah, SimEarth was $69.95 when it launched, or almost $130 today. Clearly, simulating a planet is a premium experience. SimEarth begins with an array of graphics and sound options, much like SimCity. And like that game, it's probably best to play in a higher resolution mode with fewer colors since you get a better overall view of the gameplay. However, I'm going to be playing in the lower res 256 color mode because it's how I first played it, and I just like chunky DOS games. Well, this looks intimidating. So, where do we begin? Much like SimCity, once you pass the copy protection quiz, that's pretty much up to you. Maxis called this a software toy instead of a game, so that means it's something to be played around with, experimented with, as opposed to something you win or lose with specific goals. It does have some scenario planets to try, but the best part of the game for me is creating a new planet from scratch. You can either play a totally open sandbox mode, or you can choose from 3 difficulties with varying resources. This works a lot like SimCity in the sense that you have some tools on the left-hand side and a bunch of windows floating around letting you know what's going on. But where SimEarth differs the most is that here, it's not something smaller like a city, it's a simulation of an entire planet, and that planet is treated as one interdependent living thing. It can be affected at large by making small changes, and events will play out depending on how you influence it, but the actual goings-on are mostly determined by an algorithm under the hood. In a way, it's like a planet-sized version of Conway's Game of Life, just thankfully a lot more engaging. You have 10 billion years to twist the planet's conditions by directing everything from plate tectonics to the intensity of the sun, how much it rains, frequency of genetic mutations, and so on. You can either let this play out on its own, or you can use these SimCity-like tools to plop down life forms, terraforming objects, and even some godlike powers such as meteors, volcanoes, and outbreaks of disease. Now, while I could just continue to explain how the game works like some kind of audio-visualized instruction manual, I think it'd be more enjoyable to tell you a tale. The tale of Planet Nukem. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, lived Planet Nukem. This planet had undergone eons of volcanic activity and atmospheric changes, but one day a massive ice meteor struck the surface, seeding the planet with signs of life. Add to that the correct combination of temperature and healthy waterways, and basic organisms began to thrive. Underwater things stayed nice and cozy for millions of years, leading to the evolution of mollusks, fish, and cetaceans. These creatures eventually became the first amphibians and reptiles on planet Nukem, stepping onto land and discovering a whole new world of food to eat, mostly in the form of insects. Swarms of insects had led to insect-eating plant life, and these larger plants provided food for bigger reptiles, and the reptiles grew larger, giving way to dinosaurs. Dinos fought it out on the ground for a while before taking to the sky. This new race of avians grew in record numbers, since there was an abundance of food and nothing stopping them from eating it. And then, without warning, something happened that changed the course of Planet Nukem history. The monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey landed on the surface. This mysterious monolith sparked the next stage of evolution in avians: sentience. Yes, Planet Nukem was now filled with bird people. Initially, the bird people only lived in villages, farming plants and dinosaurs in equal number. Around this time, the dinosaurs then discovered the monolith, gaining sentience as well, but it was too little, too late. The bird people were great in number and had tools, so they promptly annihilated the dinosaur people, collapsing their civilization before it even stood a chance. The bird people, now united after their war with the dinosaur people, began building cities and cooperating more than ever. This led to them advancing to the Bronze Age and then promptly to the Iron Age, all while increasing their knowledge in philosophy, science, agriculture, and medicine. One thing was neglected, though: the arts. Bird people traditionally never cared for arts and media because they were too busy quashing sentient dinosaur rebellions and trying to harness the secrets of the wind for energy production. But that didn't last, as it was about this time that the great avian arts revolution occurred, expanding what they thought was possible and leading to an eventual industrial revolution. Soon there were massive trade routes, ships, factories, and even manufacturing complexes that floated all along the planet's ocean surface. And it was all done without fossil fuels of any kind, only using clean energy like wind and solar. And part of this was because, as birds, they demanded their skies be clean, but also because they detested dinosaurs so much they wanted them to remain buried. So the bird people continued to thrive, building magnificent cities and growing to billions in population. With the population increase, energy needs increased as well, and this quickly led to the discovery of atomic energy. The atomic age was a great time of prosperity for the bird people. Along with the somewhat ironic invention of aircraft, birdkind was so pleased with itself that they forgot about sustainability. You see, due to the makeup of the planet itself, nuclear material turned out to be far more scarce than anyone realized. One day, birds were happily flying around in their nuclear-powered jetliners. The next day, they were all grounded and had to actually fly with their own wings again. This was unacceptable. Riots formed, rallies were held, speeches were squawked, and all of birdkind demanded a solution. But the tension was too high, much like the population, and there was no way either one would hold out for long. And it didn't. The first atomic bombs fell on the largest bird city in the world because they figured, hey, if we can't get enough nuclear material for everyone, we can at least take them out so there's more atomic energy left for us. But what they didn't realize was that the other city had their own planes in the sky, which then dropped bombs on that first city. This led to their allies dropping bombs, which led to everyone else dropping bombs, and that was that. The bird-ocalypse only lasted a few minutes. They had dried up most of the planet's water supply, killed 99% of all living species, and destroyed all but a few fringes of civilization. Bird-person population went from several billion to several million in an instant. But then something remarkable happened. The few groups that remained near clean water founded new cities, and finally those cities were low enough in population for nuclear energy to make sense again. The post-apocalypse wasn't all dust and wishbones like everyone had expected. In fact, they described it as heavenly. The remaining bird people now had enough resources for everyone to be happy and live in harmony. Well, that is until a plague broke out and eventually took out every last bird person on the planet because they were so packed together and lacking in medicine that they didn't stand a chance. Whoops. And that, my friends, is the story of Planet Nukem and the bird people. And Sim Earth, for that matter. That was just one outcome out of countless possibilities you can get from this if you stick with it and use a little imagination. And sure, it's mostly a bunch of maps, charts, and numbers, and basic graphical elements that initially looks more like a stodgy business plan than anything actually fun, and maybe it's not as engaging or relatable as SimCity was. In fact, most of what goes on is tremendously abstract and tough to get your head around. But as a simulation of a planet seen through the eyes of Gaia theory, I think Sim Earth achieves its goals quite admirably. It makes you think about how fragile planet Earth really is, which is something that's not always easy to grasp without some perspective. Maybe that perspective comes from the harrowing self-destruction of the bird people, but still, replace bird people with people and maybe swap a few of the specifics to match what's going on today, and you will begin to see why Maxis found the idea important enough to make Sim Earth the follow-up to SimCity. And if you enjoyed this episode of LGR, perhaps you'd like to see some of my others. A couple of them are linked to right here, so you can click those to view those. And as always, thank you very much for watching.